want to welcome everyone today. Very pleasant good morning to you wherever you're at. My name's Mike Davis. I'm a guide one up here at Hearst Castle. I'm a California boy, and I've been coming to Hearst Castle since the 1970s. When I was just a young boy, I was about 10, I think, the first time I came up here. And I was hooked on this place. And so it's really an honor and a privilege to work up here and to share some of the history and the stories that I have for you today. Before we begin, I just wanted to tell you just a little bit about the state park system. And because people many times on tour will ask, hey, Mike, how does Hearst Castle fit into the state park system? And the system has 280 state parks, and that includes roughly 1.6 million acres, 3,000 miles of trails, and 2,500 square miles, and it has about 200 miles of coastline. And of course, the hierarchy, it's run as a nonprofit, but it does have a hierarchy. Obviously, it starts at the top with Governor Gavin Newsom. Our director of state parks is Lisa Mangat, and for us on the SLO Coastal District, Dan Fallett. Mr. Hearst knew this was going to be a museum as early as 1927. He wrote his architect, Julia Morgan, and said, I can't see why San Simeon can't be a museum of the finest things that I can secure. But when he passed away in 1951, at the age of 88, the corporation approached UC Berkeley about this being an extension of Berkeley. Berkeley was very interested in the art, the buildings not so much. And this is really a pretty remote location today. Back then you're looking at about 200 miles from Berkeley to here, so they declined. And the corporation and the state of California were in contact by as early as 1953. The state was looking at this as being kind of a seasonal place, and they were finding maybe 30 to 40,000 people a year would come up here. And they said we could maybe charge $1 for the tour and 25 cents for the bus ride to come up. I mean, really, who wants to come up maybe and look at a rich guy's house, right? So this fluctuated back and forth, and a verbal agreement was reached in 1957. It was ratified in 1958, and we opened the doors June 2nd, 1958, with the expectation of maybe 150 to 200 people might show up. We turned away 800 on day one. So I guess people do want to come up and look at a rich guy's house. And since then, we've had over 43 million people come through the doors, and we average 650 to 700,000 visitors per year. So we're very proud of that. There were some stipulations when we took over as a park. We can repair, we can conserve, we can restore, but we can never finish anything up here. Just before Mr. Hearst passed away at the age of 88 in 1951, his son, Bill, he had 5 sons, and his second son was Bill, asked his father, he said, Dad, how far along are you at San Simeon? And he said, I'm roughly about halfway done. And so I would have loved to have seen what he could have come up with an additional 28 years of construction. But that's kind of a brief background of us, but it had to start even further back. And it began with Mr. Hearst's father, George Hearst. George Hearst, born in Franklin County, Missouri in 1820. He was, from an educational standpoint, he really only had a 2nd or 3rd grade education, but he was an extremely intelligent individual. He was a farmer who taught himself mining, moved out west in 1850, missed the gold rush of 1849, came out in 1850, bought a 1/6 interest in a mine in Nevada. It was called the Ophir Mine, which later became part of the Comstock Lode, one of the largest silver strikes in United States history. So that's kind of how all the money came into being. In this area here, George Hearst was the one who was initially buying the property in this area. And there were 3 Mexican land grants. And actually, Mission San Miguel was running this area. Mission San Miguel was built in 1797 and it was secularized around 1836. And you had a number of land grants. You had Piedra Blanca, Santa Rosa, and San Simeon. And there was a drought going on in the mid 1860s, and George Hearst started studying this property, and he found a number of things up here. There's water up here, a few miles from the castle up at a higher elevation. So there's some artesian wells up there. And being a miner, this property here, this image here that you're looking at right now is facing north. This is on the north unfinished terrace. We call it the Nut, is what we call it. But if you look to the right of the screen, you'll see some brown, not the dead grass, but the brown stone. That's cinnabar. So he found cinnabar, quicksilver, and mercury up here. So he's got water, he's got mining. He also thought the railroad might come up Highway 1 and stop at San Simeon. And also the harbor down below is a natural deep water port. So he's thinking maybe Monterey here in Santa Barbara, I'll buy this property. And he paid around $30,000 for roughly 40,000 acres. And oftentimes on tour, you'll hear us say, George thought he paid too much. And the reason for that is the mining didn't really materialize, the railroad didn't, and the harbor didn't materialize as much as what he wanted it to. Although they did do some, he did have a lot of things come in. The original pier at San Simeon, George built in 1878. That image there shows that particular pier. That one is about 1,000 feet in length. It cost George Hearst roughly $20,000 in 1878 to build that. If you come out on low tide, you can still see some of the pylons that are north of the new pier that was put in 1957. He also put in 6 warehouses down there. And San Simeon today is still the oldest estate village in the United States. When George passed away, he willed everything to his wife, Phoebe. Phoebe was a philanthropist. She was instrumental in the foundation of the YWCA and the PTA. And when she passed away in 1919 from complications from the Spanish influenza, that's when the bulk of the estate was willed to William Randolph Hearst, the only child. Now, William loved coming up here. He loved this property. This was called Camp Hill. And he wrote his mother, he said, you know, I would rather spend a month up here than anywhere in the world. And he probably visited quite a few places in his lifetime. So 1919 is when he was thinking about building a little something up here. And the individual that he chose was architect Julia Morgan. Many times on tour, I'll ask my group, I'll say, please name me an architect. And 9 times out of 10, everyone will say Frank Lloyd Wright. And I'm not taking anything away from Frank Lloyd Wright at all. This is really, at some instances, this is kind of comparing apples and oranges. That man did 532 projects in 70 years. Julia Morgan did over 700 projects in 50 years. She received her civil engineering degree, 1894, UC Berkeley. She's the first woman to get her certificate from Nicole in France in 1903. That's a 5 to 6 year program, and she finished that in 3 years. So it's really an amazing thing. This is job 503 for her up here, and 503 of over 700 projects. So really, it was amazing accomplishment for a woman. And you look at her; she wasn't even allowed to vote yet at the time when she was hired. So people asked Mr. Hearst, they said, you're very progressive hiring a female architect. It was rumored, he said, well, if being that way if you're being progressive, then yeah, call me progressive, okay? So the original construction began in 1919. And here we have Julia Morgan and Mr. Hearst just kind of studying over some of the plans. This is going to take 2 to 3 years. And again, it went on for 28 years. This is an image of the castle today. And then you have it looking like here again. This was taken just a few years ago. And it kind of looks like a Mediterranean village. And if you look at the very top where you have the towers, Casa Grande, it'll almost look like a cathedral or a church, all right? And with the bungalows at a lower elevation, it represented the village of today, with the ruins of the older village represented by the outdoor Neptune pool. So you have all these different levels designed to look like that. But where did he get that influence from? He went on many trips overseas. His experience was gained from trips to Europe, and he preferred the Gothic, Renaissance, and Moorish architectural styles of Spain, Italy, and North Africa. He was also influenced by the Spanish colonial revival made popular following its use at the 1915 Panama Canal exhibition held in San Diego and San Francisco. And the Hilltop has really been described broadly as Mediterranean revival, with its most recognizable feature being the iconic main building with its twin towers, whose inspiration was drawn from the Santa Maria la Mayor, which is a 16th century Catholic church in Ronda, Spain. Note in that image only one tower. Well, Hurst and Julia Morgan love symmetry. So instead of the one tower, they put two towers up. And also inspiration drawn from another place that you might be familiar with, Mission Santa Barbara. Okay. Now, prior to construction, Julia Morgan had a number of architectural hurdles she had to go through, and also hurdles she had to do with her client. Think of it, this image that you're looking at right now is from about the visitor center looking up. And for Julia Morgan, there's no power up here. There's no water, there's nothing up here. Power has been up here from 1920 on. They generated their own electricity from 1920 to 1926 using gas generators. They built a hydroelectric plant up here. When power did get up in 1926, the estimated power bill was about $1,400 a month, with the average US salary at that time about $1,400 a year. Water, remember I mentioned George Hearst knew about those artesian wells. The water system is gravity flowed going down from a few miles behind the castle. Where do you get the workers from? In 1919, the population, San Simeon, I believe, was about 30. And in Cambria, not much more, probably about 300 or 400. So they brought the workers from San Francisco and Los Angeles. I mean, how are you going to feed them? How are you going to entertain them? Julia Morgan showed movies outside to entertain some of the workers. The weather can play a major factor up here as well. And so work was done seasonally, mainly spring, summer, and fall. The winter of 1919 and 1920, we got roughly 50 inches of rain up here. So it could be a muddy mess. And the road that they came up on, it was a dirt road. And it was a dirt road up until the 1960s. The topsoil at the top of the hill is decomposed granite, DG. And Mr. Hearst wanted different trees brought up. The only thing indigenous up here are the oaks, the bays, the pines, and the manzanita. Definitely not those Italian cypress or those palm trees that you see. So they had to bring topsoil up. And they brought up an estimated 50 acres of topsoil, 5 feet deep, up the same road that you as a visitor came up when you come to visit. So you had all these different hurdles she had to go through, and she also had to deal with her client. Julia Morgan said that Mr. Hearst suffered from what she said was a changeableness of mind. Money woes played a factor as well. The castle cost in 1929 roughly $6 million to build and about $3.5 million to decorate. In 1937, Mr. Hearst found himself about $126 million in debt. So you went from the roaring 20s, a time of plenty, to the Depression and World War II, things like that. So you went from 1920s, the roaring 20s, to a time of do more with less. And also construction began, Mr. Hearst is 56 and Julia Morgan is 47. So you might have personnel changes as well. Julia Morgan went through at least 3 construction superintendents, or what she called men on the job. And each one of these people might have a different view or a different version of how to do things versus how Julia Morgan did as well. So the top of the hill kind of looks like that. That's the point looking down to where San Simeon is today. And I'd like to show just a couple of slides of kind of before and after. So really we don't have a lot of construction going on up here. Now we do, the trees have grown. You can see San Simeon, you can see the visitor center down below and the point from up above. The view was the most important thing. That's what Mr. Hearst said, utilize the view. This is the view from what we call a house, or La Casa Del Mar. That's the larger of the 3 bungalows looking down. So the original design that Mr. Hearst called for was to group a number of 3 houses or bungalows around a main structure. And then he was going to have a separate landscape design calling for the buildings to be linked together by separate pathways and a meandering walkway called an esplanade to create what Mr. Hearst said was a harmonious whole. All right, and his first time that he had some unrealistic expectations were at the very beginning. And Mr. Hearst knew this was going to be a Spanish Renaissance design, but where the north wing stands today, where the theater is, he proposed putting an English Renaissance house in. And he did not think this was going to clash with the Spanish Renaissance design that he had called for the rest of the property. But this house got to be quite large. It ended up morphing into a 2-story building with 6 rooms with a banquet hall that was 22 by 50 feet. He'd even purchased 2 stone cottages to go into that design. It was later scrapped, and he wanted to put that English Renaissance down at the bottom of the hill, but that never materialized. So we decided, let's start with the big house, Casa Grande, instead. Let's start that in September of 1919. We'll have it finished by June 1920. Kind of an unrealistic expectation. So he decided, let's start the bungalows instead. So the view you're looking at right now is the top of the hilltop prior to construction. So you might have some of the work sheds for the workers to stay in to the right. This is what it looked like power up there. So we know 1920, above ground power lines. Later, the power lines were buried to not get in view of the view, as Julia Morgan would say. I love this image here. My friend Ryan and I kind of get a kick out of this. If the road coming up prior to construction, if you've been up before, this is called Hello One. And this is where the guests, when they come up on tour, this is where you depart for the grand rooms. And that was 100 years ago, and that's today. So quite a change. And I want you to look and think of the buildings as a 4-phase project. And when you look at this image here, you can see the bungalows in the lower portion of the screen, just to the right of the outdoor Neptune pool. And so the bungalows would be phase 1, the foundation being laid for all 3, 1920. And if you go up to Casa Grande, just the center portion of Casa Grande, just in between where the 2 towers are, I call that phase 2, with the foundation put in 1922. Phase 3, the right side of Casa Grande, that's called the service wing, foundation there put in around 1925. And to the left of Casa Grande, that's the north wing, foundation there put in 1926. Now, none of these, this was a non-linear project. So you might be having work done on the bungalows and some work was being done in Casa Grande. I'm just talking the foundations. It's the easiest way to kind of think about how this timeline went. And you also look at Casa Grande and it kind of looks like a goalpost. And so if you have the front gate in the ground, the right upright is the service wing. The left upright is the recreation wing of the house. So it's kind of an easy way to think about that. And during training, I love this image here. This is by my good friend, DeRoy Jensen. He worked up here years back, and he made this scale model of Hearst Castle. And I use this a lot during training and with school tours. And you kind of see that goalpost look that I was talking about. Again, right upright, upper portion of the screen, service wing, recreation wing of the house in the foreground. So the next images I'm going to show you are starting with the bungalows. So there's 3 bungalows up here, each one named after a view. You have La Casa del Monte, House of the Mountains, 4 bedrooms, 4 bath, roughly 2,500 square feet. You have La Casa del Sol, House of the Sun, 18 rooms, 3,600 square feet, and La Casa del Mar, House of the Sea, 18 rooms, 3 floors, over 5,350 square feet. So this is Casa del Monte in the early stage of construction. And you can see them laying the foundations down, and at the bottom you can see the steel reinforcement. They use steel reinforcement in the concrete not only for strength and durability, but also for earthquake and fire resistance. We had an earthquake here, December 22nd, 2003, 6.5 on the Richter scale, epicenter just a few miles from this location. We evacuated the hill, and the state found 2 things. Number 1, 0 structural damage to these buildings. And number 2, we exceed earthquake retrofit standards from 2003. So really, that's an amazing thing. The aggregate was quarried on site. They have what's known as a Franciscan melange up here, which is very prevalent on the Central Coast. They brought the sand up from the beach, and they had to clean it of salt to mix it, and then they would bring the cement, the powder cement from LA or San Francisco and mix it all in site. They used stone, concrete, antiques, and wood. This was really the perfect storm at that time. You had the art coming over, and you also had the artisans coming over. You had Jules Supo, who is a master wood carver. You had the Dutch craftsman, the Vanderloos, who did a lot of plaster work. Ed Trinkeller did a lot of metal work. So think of this really as a big jigsaw puzzle. And a lot of these pieces were put together. You had old put together with new, and Julie Morgan was very good at putting a lot of those pieces together. This is Casa del Mar right here that we're looking at. Early stages of Casa del Mar, House of the Sea. This is the back entrance of Casa del Monte. This is the smaller of the 3 bungalows. This is the first bungalow that Mr. Hearst stayed in the summers of 1921 and 1922. So that's before, and this is what it looked like just about a week ago. So again, you see that design of both the houses and that separate garden design as well. This is Casa del Mar again. You see the forms being put up. This is Casa del Mar again, just about fully completed. You can see La Casa del Sol to the left. Casa del Mar was going to be Mr. Hearst's primary place to stay while he was in residence. He later went from Casa del Mar up into the 3rd floor of Casa Grande, which is called the Gothic Suite. That was completed around 1928. And this is La Casa del Mar today, taken about a week ago. And this is the front of La Casa del Sol, House of the Sun. Again, 18 rooms, 3 floors, about 3,600 square feet. So we have the bungalows with the foundations put in 1920. Again, I would remind everyone, it's not a linear project. So the foundations put in 1920 for the bungalows, And the foundation was put in for the big house, La Casa Grande, in 1922. And in this image here, you can see the hoisting tower in the background, that big tall structure with the sluice chute going down the side of it to the left. And they're just getting ready to start what they called the big pour on Casa Grande in 1922. The original design for Casa Grande was going to be 2 stories, with the foundation first laid in 1922. It was going to be a 2-story building, and the first pour, the big pour that I'd mentioned, started in late 1922. It went through almost all of 1923, with the first version of the towers put in by 1924. Oops. This image here, you can see the form or the framing work being done for Casa Grande. So this is 1922. And there we see just prior to the first version of the towers being put in 1924. So the first version put in 1924, and then things were added later on. You don't see the wings attached on the left or the right-hand side of Casa Grande. The Gothic suite was later added. The library, the cloister rooms, celestial suite was added around 1932. And the second version of the towers was completed as well by 1932 with the addition of the bells. But this is just prior to 1924 here. And this is what it looks like today. Concrete is very receptive to artistic expression. If you look at the front of the house, you see the white limestone facade. A lot of people on tour think those are blocks. It's actually a facade. Limestone coming from Utah. It's about 1 to 2 inches thick. You will not see that facade on the north and the south wings. He did have plans of putting that all around, but he never had time. Again, we as a state park, we can never finish anything. So it's always going to stay the same as he was last here in 1947. The front gate, Convent gate from Spain. I mentioned Ed Trinkeller, master metalworker from Germany. That fan portion on that front gate is from Ed Trinkeller, the rest of it's 16th century. If you go up the castle, just above the wrought iron balcony, you see some of the work by Jules Supo. That's a teak cornice done by Jules Supo. It took several years to do that. This is from the south side of the building. You can see the tower still haven't come up yet. You can see the hoisting tower in the center and the sluice chute to the right, and you see the folks working up on top. Interesting, nobody was killed working up here. So that was, after 28 years, that in itself was quite an accomplishment. You can see the sand and the aggregate laying on the ground as well. Everything mixed on site. Same view, different version. Again, this is right around 1924. And today. And it's a great example when I say never fully finished. You see the limestone facade. If you go up where those arched windows are to the right and go up to the other windows, you see that facade not put on. And that door that you see, that's the entrance to the assembly room. This is on the Esplanade, again, 1924. I love this image. They're framing Casa Grande, but they already have the palm trees in place. So 2 different projects, it seems. Mid-20s, and there we go today. I mentioned that English Renaissance building that he wanted to put on site. If you look straight ahead, that's the recreation wing of the house. That foundation put in 1926. That's the location that he wanted to put that English stone cottage, but again, never completed, never done. This is in the east courtyard, center portion of the big house. Some of you who've gone on tour might know that as the Doge's suite. That's what it looks like today. And another version today. Doge's suite, somewhat reminiscent of the Doge's Palace in St. Mark's Square in Venice, Italy. The windows directly underneath the cornice, that's the east end of Mr. Hearst's Gothic study. That was completed by 1928. I love some of these aerial views as well. I mentioned there was a separate garden design, and we can see the castle still has the original towers with no bells. But if you look closely, you can see the road going up, and just to the right of the road, you see the orchards being put in. So you have two different constructions going on. You have construction of the buildings. You also have construction of the gardens in the orchards as well. This image, you see the orchards being put in, but you also see the towers being raised to put the bells in. So we know this is in the early 1930s. And here we go again, pretty much completed with the rising of the towers. So this is around 1933. Now, phase two was the center portion of Casa Grande, and now we'll go to phase three, which was the service wing. So remember that goalpost. So the right upright of the service wing, the foundation was put in by 1924, and the rest of it was poured by 1927. And the service wing has the pantry and the kitchen, also has rooms above the pantry and kitchen that would have been used by service and staff, which leads to the north wing. The north wing, really nothing on the hilltop was thought about or planned longer than the north wing. I'd mentioned that English Renaissance building, which was never put in. But this was the last of the structure's foundations that were put in, and it was put in 1926. Originally, there were 2 oaks in that location, and instead of cutting the oaks down, Mr. Hearst wanted those trees moved. This took 8 to 10 months to do this. One of those oaks weighed upwards of 30 tons, so they're quite large. But when they moved it, they had this huge excavated area. And so they decided that's when we're going to put the first foundation in. And that was put in by 1926. And then Mr. Hearst decided that he wanted to put a 3-lane bowling alley down in the basement. But he was told he only had room for 2. But he wanted 3. So they tore the foundation out. And some of these footings, I want to remind you, some of these are the size of automobiles. So it was quite large. They extended it, widened it by 1929, poured the first floor by 1929, which included the billiard room and the theater. The theater was first used in 1930 when Calvin Coolidge paid a visit, and it was completed by 1931. The north wing today has 30 total rooms, 10 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, 5 sitting rooms, miscellaneous rooms like the theater and the billiard room. And also, he even has a gun room and a dentist's office in there. So you had it all when you're here. But originally, the wings look the same. And as you can see in this image, right in the center of the hoisting tower, you just see 2 floors above at ground level. And if you look to the left of the hoisting tower and to the right, you see tower rooms. He actually added floors in between the 2 tower rooms. That became 4 total floors. And Mr. Hearst, it was rumored that he wanted to stay on the 4th floor of the north wing, but that never materialized. He left before those rooms were fully finished. So this is the north wing today, and you can see how that the upper floor in between the 2 tower rooms was filled in. And this is the north wing again. If you look in between the oak trees, if I move my cursor over, you can see these bars here. These rooms, that was going to be a balcony there, but never fully completed. These are what we call the over the billiards rooms. You have first, second, and third over billiards. And these were some of the last rooms that Julia Morgan worked on. These were completed around 1937. And that was pretty much the last time she was up here, was 1937, though her initials were on every blueprint up until 1946. So that brings us to the other main structures on the hilltop, and that's the swimming pools, both the Neptune and the Roman pool, and of course the tennis courts. And the outdoor Neptune pool went through 3 phases. Originally, it was just a reflecting pool. This is the location of the pool prior to even the reflecting pool put in. And so the first version was put in 1924. Kind of a garden type pool, like I said, a reflecting pool, but it wasn't big enough, so they had to make it a little bit bigger. Hearst had 5 sons, and the sons needed a place to swim. So the second version was put in 1926, a little bit larger. That's during construction, so this is late 25, early 26, and there we have it with water in. So this is the second version of the pool. Of course, every pool needs a canoe in it. It kind of puts it in perspective, the size of the second pool, but still not big enough. So a third version was put in, and that was completed around 1935, about 85 years ago. This image here shows you, and I'll show what the grouping of statues look like. This is where the Birth of Venus grouping of statues are going to be, in the alcove of the Neptune pool. You can still see the second version of the pool still with water in it. Almost looks like a infinity pool. That's what it looks like today from that same view. The outdoor Neptune pool holds 345,000 gallons of water. It's about 104 feet in length, about 96 feet in width, if you count that alcove that we're looking at. 10 feet deep at its deepest, 3.5 feet deep at its shallow end. That pool had to undergo restoration a short while ago. When they were expanding the 3 pools, they did not tear the existing pool out. So it created what we called a cold joint, and the pool started leaking. The pool was losing between 3,000 to 5,000 gallons of water a day. So we had to do some restoration work on it. It took several years to do that, and it cost about $10 million. They actually brought the marble for the base of the pool, taken from the same location Mr. Hearst did over 80 years ago, Vermont Marble Company. This is from the Neptune terrace looking down towards the temple. And the temple, you can see some scaffolding going on. It's a composite piece. You have old and new on that. The columns just behind the scaffolding range in dates from the 1st to the 4th century AD. But some of the work is 20th century. So that's kind of that jigsaw puzzle that I was telling you about. And I love the columns to the right of the temple and to the left of the temple. Mr. Hearst, with that changeableness of mind, let's move those. And this is what the pool looks like today. This image was from the 1940s. Just kind of wanted to put this in and what it looks like today. And this was after restoration, just a short while ago. They did a magnificent job on that pool. And if you've never been up here at night, here's a plug to come and see us at night when we open back up. You can see the Neptune pool lit up. Absolutely phenomenal. So finally, it comes to the tennis courts and the Roman pool. And the tennis courts, there were actually 3 versions of the tennis courts when they were put in. Originally, it was a single court. And then the other version, it was in a different direction as to what it is today. But you just have the courts in this image here. And Mr. Hearst did want an indoor pool, so they decided to put the indoor pool underneath the tennis courts. So as you can see, the courts are already up. So they had to dig a lot of that out. And this was about a 5 to 5.5 year project. It started in 1927 and it was finished by mid 1932. That's the tennis courts, not quite 100 years ago to today. And then of course, the infamous tennis courts, the glass blocks in the center of the court, they allow natural lighting to go down to the indoor pool. The lights you see around the court, those are originals. They still work today. And then we have the iconic Roman pool. Roman pool, 80 feet in length, roughly 30 feet in width. It's a flat bottom pool. It's 10 feet deep from end to end. There is an alcove that's about 3.5 feet deep. Holds 205,000 gallons of water. They could have heated that pool to about 75 degrees with a kerosene heating system. Over 2 million glass tile from Murano, Italy. Some of those 22 karat gold. You get to walk on that when you visit. And the Roman pool again today. It's funny, some of the original plans that Julia Morgan had was they were actually going to put a glass dome tropical South Sea island on the hill in that location. And she even said, we'll make it a saltwater pool. She proposed a glass partition going across the pool. And in her words, she said we could have sharks and alligators on one side and guests could swim in the other. I would have loved to have seen that completed. This is the original design that Julia Morgan, her conceptual design, she was pretty close from what the final version of Casa Grande turned out to be. They said there was like a lightning bolt going between Mr. Hearst and Julia Morgan. And then you compare it to the left, that's what they started with. And to the right, 28 years later in construction. I see Julia Morgan coming up on that left-hand side. You know, all of us have a phone and we can take images and write text and we can send it anywhere in the world. And I imagine Julia Morgan going up to the top prior to even grading with a box camera, maybe taking images of to the south, the east, the north, and the west. And she goes back to her office in San Francisco and she gets those images enlarged and she might draw on them. Maybe put a piece of tissue paper on them. She knows kind of the inspiration, the look that Mr. Hearst is going for. She draws on those images and sends them to Hurst, who might be in New York. What do you think? He might like it, maybe change a few things. Okay, let's make blueprints, let's make plans. I mean, this was really a monumental undertaking. It really and truly was. Why did you build up here? They asked Mr. Hearst. He said, I just love the place. I loved everything about it. This image here, it is still a working horse and cattle ranch. The corporation has about 80,000 acres around us. They're still running horse and cattle. It's interesting to note, Mr. Hearst, only one time in writing did I ever find him call this a castle. This was usually always referred to as the ranch. And I love this image here from Vicky, the castle in the clouds. Hedda Hopper was a guest. She was a gossip columnist. She said a ticket to Hearst Ranch was like a ticket to Never Neverland. Never has there been such a place, and never will we see its likes again. And in closing, I just want to say, really, what a remarkable accomplishment by a group of very determined and creative individuals to create something like this in such an isolated location. I think Mr. Hearst would be very proud if he saw how things are today.